asked individuals, among other things, what was their racial background, and they said, what do they think of reparations for slavery? It was the largest racial gap in any poll in history. About 75% of African Americans are in favor of reparations, and fewer than 5% of white Americans are in favor of reparations. And in fact, as Professor Al Brophy wrote, that number probably overstates it, because a number of the respondents to the poll were so upset upon hearing the word that they hung up. So they didn't count for the poll. So actually it's probably lower than the stated 5%. This is shocking, and yet it's at the same time really sort of unsurprising. The late Derek Bell talked about the problem of interest convergence, and talked about how some of what we like to think of as the sort of great liberal victories in this march towards an egalitarian society have actually been actions of sort of Machiavellian plotting to keep people who are subordinated from rising up against subordination. And so how in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education was seen as a necessary compromise in order to prevent widespread unrest, in order to keep the coalition of US allies in line, and suddenly the US State Department and all of these powerful forces are behind the idea of integration, and suddenly everybody's behind it. So on the one hand, when we read Professor Bell's work, it's very hard to think of a world in which reparations would be conceivable, because, and it makes sense that there's such a disparity, because this is an area where people see themselves as at odds with another set of people. And you see the terms used. This is a special interest, this is a handout, this is a preference, this is a whatever else. And I think into that standoff, and that's been the standoff for decades, and it's very unfortunate, but into that we inject new blood, new conversations with Ta-Nehisi's article and with the conversations that are happening in the Caribbean. One of the things that I loved about Ta-Nehisi's article was how little it spoke about slavery or reparations, which is interesting because it's an article titled The Case for Reparations, and yet it could really be titled A History of Oppression and Subordination of African Americans in the United States. And in a way, once you tell that history, you don't really need to make the philosophical arguments. You just tell the history and you just let it sink in. And the way that people are avoiding the conversation now is by ignoring that history. Ariella Gross has this fantastic article called When is the Time of Slavery? She's a legal historian. She talks about these narratives that people construct. And so the most popular narrative for when slavery existed is it existed a long time ago, a long way away. It doesn't have anything to do with society now, and it was a bump in the road and we got over it a long time ago. And that's the dominant narrative. How do we challenge that narrative? We tell stories. And when that happens, I mean, it's been 60 years since the Civil Rights Act, right? How do we justify the continued gap? How do you justify the fact that for every white dollar in wealth, median wealth, African American families have a nickel? There's a 20-to-1 gap in median wealth in the middle of the road. So how do we justify that? And people are justifying it by saying, well, this is obviously a sign of pathology of black families, whatever else. And what we do is we tell the stories. I write in the area of law, and law has been highly unsuccessful so far in seeking reparations for slavery. And there have been lawsuits against the government, there have been lawsuits from very fantastic individuals. The slave descendants lawsuit, the court said no, violates the statute of limitations, doesn't show causation in tort. The Cato lawsuit, no, sorry, we have sovereign immunity. There's all of these legal doctrines. It calls to mind the statement by the great African-American poet, Audre Lorde, who said that the master's tools can never dismantle the master's house. And is the law one of the master's tools, and can we use it to dismantle the master's house? I don't think we can just using legal tools as legal tools. Why not? Because these legal tools were made by people like Blackstone, Lord Cook, people who didn't have to worry about their relatives being enslaved. So they create a law of torts that looks very simple to them, but doesn't include the possibility of somebody being enslaved based on the color of their skin and their entire racial group being enslaved. So yes, this is one of the master's tools. How do we get rid of this? How do we expand it? We show a society that doesn't have a tool to address this is an immoral society. A society that doesn't have a tool to address this kind of thing is evil. And when we tell these stories, we can expand the legal doctrines. We've been trying to put new wine in old bottles. It hasn't fit. Legal tort doctrines in the US right now have failed, despite people like me and Al Brophy and Charles Ogletree writing about ways they could try to succeed. They have failed. How do we do that? Let's get some new bottles. Let's draw on the work of Ta-Nehisi. Let's draw on the work of our colleagues in the Caribbean to restructure, to say, you know what, if the legal system we have now doesn't grant reparations, the problem is not with the claim for reparations, the problem is with the biased system we have now.
Okay, we're going to move right ahead, and the way we're going to proceed is we're going to allow, we're a little over time, but we're going to allow a comment period. There's a microphone there. It's going to be limited, and we're not going to necessarily make a Q&A. We're going to give people opportunities to make a 1-minute comment, a 1-minute observation, or something of that level. But before we do that, I wanted to make the following announcement. Because when we were in Chicago, Congressman, the question was, how do we continue this effort? And we said in Chicago that this would not be the end of this process. We want to thank you, Congressman. We want to give special thanks to Keenan Keller and your staff, because we've been working very closely to try to make this session a strategic, an important aspect of a larger strategy. And that larger strategy includes the following: that the Institute of the Black World 21st Century has been in conversations with Sir Hilary Beckles about the possibility of the synergy between the reparations movement in the Caribbean and the reparations movement here in the United States. And he has kindly consented that the Reparations Commission, of which he chairs, will in fact conduct a session right here in the United States of America. Good. The Caribbean Reparations Commission here in the United States, and I can tell you that it's going to be in New York. Well, it's going to be in New York because they have this huge Caribbean, and, we want to just, we want to make sure it's like working, right? We got plenty of folk up in there. So that's number one, and that's very important because we think that that will draw attention not only here in the United States, but it will also draw attention back in the Caribbean. But second, it's important for us to move this process forward, and we think there's no better model for moving it forward than the fact that there is a Caribbean Reparations Commission. So therefore, at our June board meeting of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, I put forth a proposal which was approved by the board, that the Institute of the Black World 21st Century will be convening a U.S. Reparations Commission which parallels the Caribbean Reparations Commission. First and foremost, we will look to those persons who have been, or representatives of those persons who've been on the battlefield for a long time. So we have already preliminarily talked to NCOBRA to have 2 representatives on such a commission. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan with the Nation of Islam, people like Dr. Conrad World, Dr. Ira Carruthers, Dr. Ray Winbush, the December 12th movement. These are people who've been on the battlefield for a long time. Beyond that, of course, our beloved sisters on the panel, and Kichi Taifa. We'd like to think that perhaps Ta-Nehisi Coates would agree to perhaps participate in some way. By the way, the kind of scholarship that he's putting forward is so compelling. That's what we need, compelling. You just can't ignore it. And by the way, there is a group, and the group eludes me now, but there are a group of black scholars who are already, based on the inspiration of the CARICOM proposal, eliciting papers about the kind of 10-point, 7-point, whatever program that might be adopted here in the United States of America. But we also want to ask people like Susan Taylor to be a part of this. Professor Charles Ogletree, Danny Glover. We want to ask people who are from a broad cross-section of people, labor, our brother Gresham, George Gresham from SEIU in New York. So we want to alert you that this is in the offing. So what we plan to do is to host the convening of the commission in New York. So Hillary Beckles has agreed that he will then go on a book tour around the country because he has a fantastic book. We obviously can't go everywhere, but what we will do is we're tentatively looking at Atlanta, Houston, and Los Angeles, with Sir Hillary Beckles after this commission has hosted it, so that we can build up some momentum. And we'll obviously be inviting you, Congressman. We'll be inviting the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. We'll be inviting the Reverend Jesse Jackson and those who are involved in Chicago. In other words, we want to take it up a notch. We want to get broad exposure to this. And once this commission is convened and receives and has a series of proposals, it won't end there, because the idea will be to move around the country with a series of regional hearings so that you will be able to come out and say, we agree, we disagree, add this, add that. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of that. But the point is, as much as the proposal is the process of engaging our people at the grassroots level so that we can in fact move the reparations movement forward. Last thing I'm going to say about that is we broke. We do a lot of stuff in IBW on guts and faith. And there'll be no corporation who's going to give a corporate sponsorship to this effort. And there'll be no foundation that will be willing to provide funds for it either. So this means that what we'll have to do is we'll have to come to you in order to finance this. And we've already got a tentative budget. The budget's about $150,000 to make sure that the people will be able to travel and be engaged and whatever. So we're going to have to bring this one to you for your support in order to make this possible. So I just wanted to get that out of the way and to make that announcement in terms of where we're moving, Congressman, in terms of the future, in order to move and energize the decade of the Conyers Reparatory Justice Movement. I understand we also have Ambassador Barnes, is it? In the House, the ambassador from Madagascar, is that true? U.S. Ambassador to Madagascar. Okay. Would you please just raise your hands? Would you please give her recognition? Now, I know that Foreign Minister, you may have to catch a train or whatever, so people will be kind enough, if they have to leave, don't grab them and hold them too much. He's a handsome, tall guy. I don't know whether he's spoken for or not, but just let him get out the He's got to go make a train because he's got to speak at the United Nations representing his country. But again, the quality of having the Foreign Minister, State President of the Grenadines, and this outstanding panel. Let's give them all a big applause. And thank you all so much. You've been so patient. So we're almost done. So we come to our break. Give your name, please, and your succinct comment, or it can be a question, but we wanted more to give you an opportunity to express your views.
My name is Rachel DeCoste. I'm Black